now let's talk about functions in Dart. Functions are basic building blocks on any programming language, and it is no different in Dart. So it comes from a principle called try, which is don't repeat yourself. And usually when you want to perform a specific task in any programming language, you usually use functions because they are just a block of code that performs a specific task. Okay, so it has some advantages, like it does not allow you to repeat yourself. So let's say you always want to calculate the square of a number. So instead of always writing it anytime you want to do that, you can write a function that performs that specific task. And anytime you need it to calculate that, you just call that function. See, you call it as you want to use it. So now it also helps you to divide complex programs into smaller parts, and also helps you to write really clean code. So now we're going to go into all the types of functions in Dart, and we will see how we use it in our program. So let's go. So now the syntax for writing a function in Dart. So you will have a return type, and you have a function name, and then the parameters, and then there is going to be a code for you to execute. Now look at this part. I am writing it inside the main function. Look at this. Is a main function. It allows us to perform a specific task. It is the entry point for our whole program. So anything that we are going to run is going to be within the main. But when you're declaring your function, it's good to always do it outside your main, because when you want to call this function, you're going to be doing it inside of the main. Okay, so we have a return type here. It can return any type. You know, when you're creating variables, there's a type. A function can also return any type. For example, when you're calculating the square of a number, you can say you want it to return double. That's when you pass in some arguments. I'm going to tell you what are arguments. So when you pass in some numbers to your function, you want it to return the square of the numbers you have passed into. So, for example, we can have param1, param2. Look at it. So you can pass in two variables in here. Whatever it is, you can pass in, you can give it a type, and then you need to have a function name here. So the return type here tells you the function output. It can be void. When you say void, that means it does not return anything. It can return a string int double. So if the function does not return anything, you use a void. So now we have the function name. So let's create a function. Let's give it any function name. You can give it anything. And we can always follow a convention called lower camel case. So when you're starting, it has to be lower case. And then when you want to do the second part of your variable, you give it a capital letter, you start with a capital letter. You can say function name instead of doing function underscore. Here, you can do function name. Same way we're declaring our variables. So use a lower camel case when you're declaring your function name. And then parameters also. These are parameters. They are like an input. So you are inputting something. So here you now have to input this and then input this. So also use the convention of lower camel case as well. So now, let's say you want to write a function that prints something. So print something. I just say print something. Now, here we can say print something. And what this function does is that when you call print something, it's going to just print something on your console. So let's try that. Now you have declared the function here. Now when you want to call the function, you call it in the main. So now we just call the name of the function directly and put this open and close. And then when you save and refresh, you can see it's printing something on the console. Good. But we have a limitation here. So it's not dynamic enough. So let's say you want to actually print a value. How are you going to use this function to print a value? So that's where parameters are important. So let's say we want it to only print a string. So you can see our parameter, we are giving it a type of a string, and then we give it a parameter name. It can be anything. We can say param here. So you can see that this is already giving us an error that one positional argument expected by print something but 0 found. That means it's expecting us to pass in something in here. Now, when we get a string back from print something, we want to pass it down to this method, print method, and just use string interpolation and just put a param there, or just pass in param straight up here. Now, let's pass in something. Let's declare my name to be John. It's going to want me to use a string. So let's pass in, what is my name? I pass in my name here. You can see you can pass in a string. Pass in a string here because the method print something requires a string. So you need to pass in a string. And then when we save that, it's going to print John. So let's say I change John here to James and I refresh, you can see. So anytime we want to print, we can just call this print something and we pass in our string param in there and we are good to go. Awesome. So let's do a simple function that adds two numbers. So let's say we want to add numbers. So it's simple. We just create a function, add numbers, integer a, int b. So this one is taking two parameters. It's taking two parameters and you can see that it's going to print a plus b. You remember our plus operators. So you take the parameter a, parameter b, and add them together, and it's going to print them. So let's call add numbers here. Now we don't have numbers yet. So let's declare, let's do constant a equals to 10, constant b equals to 20. So when we call add numbers here, it's expecting us to pass in two arguments. And we pass in 10 and 20. Now, notice that the error is telling you something about positional. That means that you need to pass it in the order that you have declared your function to be. So in this case, when you say add numbers, you need to add in the first number and then the second number. So in our case, we want to pass in A, we want to pass in B, and then when we save, it's going to print 30. So A has to go with A, B has to go with B. It has to be in the order that it is requesting for. Okay, so now that we have been able to do simple functions, we are going to look at the types of functions in Dart. The type of function we have looked previously is the function that returns void. That means that it does not return anything. That's why we are using void. But what about if we have a function that should return something? In the ideal world, when you want to add numbers, when you create a function that should do a task, you should actually return something here. So, for example, anytime we want to add two numbers together, we want to always call add numbers, and it should give us a number. Because when you add 2 plus 5, it should return 7, right? It should give you 7. So that's why we have this type of function that returns something. And when you want to do that, notice we have int A here, int B here. So it's taking in integers. Now we want our answer to be in integers. Now, once you put it instead of void, you can make it a type of anything. It can be an object, it can be type like integer, string, double, number, anything, as long as it is a type. So here, you can see that there is an error here, and it's saying that we should try adding return or throw a statement. So what we want to happen here is we will use the return keyword such that when we add A and B together, we want to return the answer. So let's create a variable sum, which is going to hold the value of A plus B. So when you use A and the operator plus and B, it will store it in the sum container. And then we can return the sum anytime we have a result. So now anywhere we call add numbers, it will give us the sum. So here you can see that in our main method, we are calling add numbers. But because we are not printing anything in the body of add numbers, we will not see anything on this console. So instead, we will wrap this in the print so that when we print add numbers and we pass in A and B, it will give us the answer. Or better still, we can create a final and say sum here. And then we are going to print in sum. So anytime you want to add two numbers, we just call in add numbers. I'm passing A and we're passing B, and it's going to print out the sum. So let's run this and see that our answer is 30. 10 plus 2, 30. Now, notice that anytime we are passing in A and B, it is positional. So let's talk about positional parameter. And we will now look at optional parameters as well. Okay, so now we have print something here. Print, so let's change it to print my info. So we want to print an information about ourselves here. So now I want to take in a string and an integer age, so that here I can say my name is the string name that I pass in, and I am whatever years old. So let's comment this one out. And then we can do print info. We are passing the name, And let's change this A to age. And then we pass in age here. So we have name, age, which we have passed in. And when we run the app, we will see my name is James and I am 10 years old. Great. Here you can see that we are passing in name and we are passing in age where it's supposed to be. If we change this around and say we pass in age and we pass in name, it's going to give an error because it is expecting that you pass in a string in the first, as the first argument here. So, and it is expecting you to pass in an age, which is an integer, as the second argument here. And you can see that it's showing the argument type string can't be passed to the parameter type int. So that is positional functions in Dart. Now, even though we have positional argument, what if we have another parameter that we want to pass here? We will call it string title. But not everybody has a title, but we want to have some default value. We can use this trick and put in it's not a brace. I'm not sure what it is called, but it's a special character anyways. And wrap it around our declaration here. And then we can have a default value. So I'm saying Mr. or Mrs. here. So if you pass in title, it will show the title. But if you don't pass in anything, it's going to use this value. So, and my title is this title. Now, if I print this, let's print it. You can see that it's showing my name is James and I am 10 years old and my title is Mr. and Mrs. Now, here, if we don't pass anything, it's going to be using this default. But let's say I pass in Mr. here, or even Miss. And we save that and then we run it. You can see my name is James, and I'm 10 years old, and my title is Miss because we passed in Miss here. So it's going to disregard this and use the value that we passed. It is only going to use this default value when you have not passed in anything. Great. So that is positional parameter for you in Dart. Now let's tweak this a bit. I'm going to remove this and then we're going to talk about named parameters. So for named parameters, you need to wrap all your arguments in a curly brace. So we have curly brace here. So now you can see that there is a problem here. We can also have our title here, which will work. You can see we have a default for a title. But if you look here, it's giving us an error because it is positional. It does not want you to, it wants you to always pass it anyways, unless you have explicitly told it that you don't want to pass it. So that brings us the concept of nullability. So let's say you don't want to always pass in the name. You can make the type nullable, like you can pass in a null there. And we are going to do the same for age. So we are making it nullable in this case, meaning that we don't have to pass it. It is going to still work. Now, when you are now calling the function, you have to call the name of the argument. The name of the argument. So let's say name. This is name. So it has to be the same thing that you have, name. So what's the value of the name? It is this name up here. and we are going to say name. Same thing as our age. What's the value of the age? So this can be anything. For example, I can pass in B here. It will still work because that's the value of the argument here. And then you can pass in title or not. It's going to still use the default. And let's save that. And you can see my name is James and I'm 20 years old and my title is Mr. Now let's take away this name. It will still work because we have said that we can pass in name or not. That is the type here. This not. We are making this name this parameter nullable. So when we save that and reload, you can see it's showing my name is null because we are telling it that it can be null. So be careful when you are using nullables in Flutter. So try as much as possible to, unless you know that it has to be null before you should use it. So let's say we want to force the user to always pass in the name and the age. We can use a keyword in Dart, the required keyword. We just tell it that these arguments of type string, it's required. This parameter is required. And also we can do the same thing for the age. And when we save that and you over on the method, you can see that it is telling you name is required. So since it's not positional function, you can put it here, anywhere. So now we are passing in name. And when we roll, you see my name is James and I am 20 years old and my title is Mr. Now let's talk about arrow functions in Dart. And it's quite simple actually, and it sometimes makes your code cleaner, but is a syntax in Dart, a shorthand syntax for any function that only has one expression. So take a look at these add numbers. You can see that it returns sum here, and we just assign a plus b. So we can actually make this simpler by returning a plus b directly. So we can say a plus b, and then we get rid of this one. Now you can see that it is actually a one-liner. It's now a one line. Let's fix this, a plus b not a equals to b. You see? So we can use arrow functions here. So we can get rid of the curly braces, and then we can get rid of the return and go to the first line and just use equals to and greater than, which is an arrow. You see, it's an arrow function. What this means is the same thing as the last code we wrote. It means that we have a function add numbers that takes in two parameters, a and b, and has a return type of int. And what it does is it returns a plus b. It returns a plus b. One line makes things a little bit easier. Now, let's talk about how to use functions as variables, and we call them closures. So the idea is that a function is also a value, and you can pass it around to other functions as parameters. Okay, so let's look at how we can do that. So let's say void, and we can use something we called callback and say callback sample. Now we need to define parameters here, but instead we are going to declare a function as a parameter. So here I'm going to say function void function, and it's going to take a string of value, and I'm going to call it callback. This is pretty useful for when user taps on the screen and you want to call a callback, something like that. Now, so we've created a function called callback sample, and it's going to take in a parameter, which is a function. You see, this is how we declare a function. Okay, so let's create a function. We will call it print something. And it's going to print, it will take in a value of type string, and then it's going to print the value. Now, let's use our callback sample now. So let's comment this one out, and then we can use our callback sample. Now, it wants us to pass in a method that it will have a type of value. You can see that it is almost the same thing. It is the same thing as the parameter we've defined. Print something is the same, has the same parameters. So the parameters has to match. So instead of passing this one here, we can just pass in print something. And then without the open and close. So we just leave it like that. And then when we run this, you can see it has hello. We are printing out hello. So this is one of the ways to use closures in Dart. And you can notice that we have passed in print something without the parentheses. I finally know what that is called, parentheses. Open and close parentheses. Okay, another way we can work around with closures is using something called the type definition. It makes your code a little bit cleaner. For example, let's say we have a function that the task is to create the power of 2. But here we want to use a function instead. So we want to have a function here. And then we can call it anything. We can call it a callback. So instead of just using the parameter like this, we can use something called the type def. And the type def, we can call our type def number getter. Just say number getter, and it will be equals to this param here. So let's delete this one. So now we have created a type definition here. So type defs are useful when you know that you are going to be using it a lot in your program. Now, when we do a power of 2, you can then say number getter, and it will be getter is going to return number times number here. Or instead, we are going to say getter times getter. So let's delete this, and we have getter times getter. And in this case, it's going to return int and not a void. So we do have, so the power of 2 will be, so when we pass in a function that returns a number, which is of type int, and we pass in as the power of 2, it should multiply those functions together, and then we will have the power of 2. So now let's say we have a function that is get number here. Get number here. You can see it only returns 2. Now, if you want to use this power of 2 function, so let's go up here. We will just do print power of 2, and the get number returns 2. So we don't have to do the parentheses here, and then let's comment the callback sample out. You can see it gives us 4 because 2 times 2 together is 4, basically. And that is the way to do callbacks and closure in Dart.